Aloha class, I wanted to do exercise 2-15. So this exercise is a little bit tricky, but definitely doable. So compute the predetermined overhead rate that was used in January. Complete the following job cost sheet for partially completed Lexington Garden project. So those are our objectives. I will read the problem a little bit just to give us some background. So Leeds Architectural Consultants began operations on January 2nd. The following activity was recorded in the company's work in process account for the first month of operations. Okay, so we have this information given to us. Lead Architectural Consultants is a service firm, so the names of the accounts it uses are different from names used in manufacturing companies. Cost of subcontracted work is comparable to direct materials. Cost of subcontracted work is comparable to direct materials. Direct staff cost is the same as direct labor. Studio overhead is the same as manufacturing overhead. So they gave us some insight on what these actually are. And this should be very familiar if we can see that work in process has direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. This should be applied manufacturing overhead. Completed projects is the same as finished goods. Finished goods, right? So they're transferring goods from work in process. We credit it and we'll debit our finished goods. So they finished some of this. So this account isn't up to date, I can tell, because we still have debits and credits, and it should be, you know, one final subtotal. So let's sum these up and sum these up. And so we have debits of $425. Credits of $390. So let's just get the difference of those. So we have a job that's still in progress, and $35,000 of it we're still using it, right? We need to understand how much of the $35,000 is direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. So let's continue on. Apart from the different terms, the accounting methods used by the company are identical to the methods used in a manufacturing company. Leeds Architectural Consultants use a job order costing system and apply studio overhead to work in process on the basis of direct staff costs. At the end of January, only one job is still in process, so I know there's this one job because there's $35,000 still work in process. This job, Lexington Gardens Projects, has been charged with $6,500 in direct staff costs. So of this $35,000, I know that direct staff costs, part of it, right? So this should be direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, right? Or these three should equal a total of $35,000, right? Because I know that's what's left over in my account. So I'm trying to figure out how much of each category makes up this $35,000. So this is going to be our total amount here. And they told me that direct labor was $6,500. So a lot of companies will allocate their manufacturing overhead based on direct labor costs, direct labor hours. And so we have some insight on this relationship between direct labor and manufacturing overhead. And so we will need to compute a predetermined overhead rate that was used for January. So I can see that we have, right, the total cost of manufacturing overhead, right? Total cost over here was $120,000. So predetermined overhead rate equals total manufacturing cost divided by an allocation base, which could be hours. It could also be dollars, direct labor that they spend in dollars. Over here, all I have is direct labor dollars, how much they spend in dollars. So remember, we're going to divide. This will be our numerator and this will be our denominator, and that'll give us a predetermined overhead rate. So they had $120,000, and our denominator will be our direct labor costs. We can allocate it based on costs. So let's see our predetermined overhead rate. This one divided by this one. You could also make this a percentage, right? So if we have direct labor staff costs, if we times it by 160% or 1.6, we would get studio overhead. So if we use this predetermined overhead rate for this problem, we could also figure it out for this problem. So let's use this predetermined overhead rate. So that's your solution for part 1. We found a predetermined overhead rate. It's 160% of the direct labor costs. So manufacturing overhead will be 160% higher than this direct labor costs. So let's try that. Times it by 1.6. Okay, so, and that's how we're gonna find how we're gonna allocate our manufacturing overhead for this problem. Now it asks you to find the costs of subcontracted work. So we know our manufacturing overhead, we know our direct labor. This is our total manufacturing cost here. And so we could plug this number, right? The total of these will equal 35,000. So let's plug that. Normally we add these three together. If we do add those three together, it does equal 35. Let's see that. 35,000. Yep, so this is what we're looking for when it asks for complete the following job cost sheet for the partially completed Lexington Garden project. We completed the job cost sheet because we know that the Lexington Garden project will have 35,000 of manufacturing cost. We know that 6,500 was from direct labor. Using a predetermined overhead rate, we found that this was the manufacturing overhead that was going to be allocated to the project, and then by working backwards, we could find the direct materials there.